Welcome back. Casual Friday in the Majority Report. Matt's music choice. So save your tweets for him. Joining us now is Cliff Schecter, my good friend Cliff. And obviously, before we talk to Cliff, in any scenario, we have to play the Cliff Schecter theme song. So, Matt, let's hear it.
Cliff Schecter, Libertas LLC. New media, public relations, and strategy. You want any of these services, you know who you gotta see. Cliff Schecter, Libertas LLC.
Cliff, how you doing, Paisan? What's going on?
Doing all right. It's been quite a week, my friend.
Yeah, it really has. It really has. And it's been a week that, obviously reflects a lot of things. But, this is an issue. We're talking about guns, of course, that I would say not only, you work on, but you really sort of pour your heart and soul into. And I think that there has been something of a shift. There obviously has been something of a shift. And a shift that I might add, you've been predicting for a while, my friend, even when other people are a lot more pessimistic. And that's important to note as well. But let's get to it. Before we go into, you have a good piece in the Daily Beast talking about the politics around it. But before we do that, can you give a just sort of concise explanation, first, of what President Obama's executive order actually does? And then we'll touch briefly on President Obama's op-ed in the New York Times that came out yesterday, which also has some really important political ramifications as well.
Sure. Let me begin by thanking you guys for having me on. And as for your kind comment about my predicting this, obviously I see things on the inside and from, and I've been saying that while it's still depressing, and it will always be as these shootings continue to occur, you can see what is changing, especially when you're kind of working on the inside of this and you're watching it from that vantage point of how culturally we're changing. It's just that's obviously longer term change because the NRA had the field to themselves during the first decade of this of our new century here, and that we're still living with that for most of it anyhow. But to get to what President Obama did, look, I think most people are aware right after the tragedy in Newtown, you had Senators Manchin and Toomey, both A-rated by the NRA, both gun owners, get together and put together what was very reasonable legislation dealing with background checks, something, by the way, that the NRA fully and vocally supported in 1999 after Columbine, right. And something that many senators, it was actually passed in the Senate, a similar version to close the gun show, loopholes. It was known then. There weren't as many internet sales then, so it really was mostly a loophole of gun shows and things of that sort. You had a number. Mitch McConnell, for example, voted for that. Right. A number of Republicans who suddenly now are born again. All gun background checks will lead to tyranny. We're not that way. But so what President Obama did is what was left for him to do, because they blocked it, even though we had 55 votes. And that was not going to be good enough because they filibuster everything. So what he did here is he did what is in his purview as President of the United States to do, which is to define certain rules and regulations and what they mean, define what the language means. And so in this, the bill that was passed, the Brady bill in 94 or so, 94, 95, was, talked about the fact that people who are not in the business, put that little term in quotes, of selling guns, would not have to conduct background checks. And back then, you didn't, people always find ways to create loopholes. What you had essentially was, a few people here and there, they wanted to sell an antique gun, or they wanted, they had a couple extra guns lying around from the family that were left to them in a will, and they wanted to sell those. And it was, those folks should not have to do the kind of background check, and background checks were not as easily conducted back then, that we didn't have the technology we have now. And so that was what was needed to get it through, especially to get some rural state congressional leader or members, leaders, others to vote in favor of it. But what we saw happen, and we've got this on video. For example, some of the stings I worked on, what was then Mayors Against Illegal Guns with, and now Everytown is obviously the newer iteration of the organization. You'd find somebody at a gun show. Actually, one of them was here in Ohio. We did Tennessee. We do these undercover stings, and you'd see these guys saying, "Yeah, I don't need to do background checks. I've sold 150 assault weapons this year." So essentially, they took advantage of this loophole, and they would claim, well, I'm not really in the business of selling guns. And what President Obama did is he clarified that, which is that if you derive, the majority of your income from selling guns, if you sell multiple guns, no one thing will determine, but common sense will determine. If you're selling tons of guns, if you're deriving a lot of your income from it, and these kinds of things, you are in the
You're
business
not
of selling
selling
guns.
an antique heirloom. I mean, that's sort of as basic as it gets, and you can't exploit that loophole anymore if you're in the gun business. That's really the sort of bottom line.
Some of these people still will exploit it. There's no
Sure.
because you can't change it to the level it needs to be changed, which is to pass a universal. What Washington State did via ballot initiative, what Oregon did in their legislature, more recently Delaware did in their legislature, and a number other states had done this in the past. And we'll have two more ballot measures, at least two, coming up this year in Maine, which we're going to talk about that state in a little bit, I believe.
Yeah, we sure are.
And Nevada, that will do that too. So this will not do that, because there will be some people that still can say, I sell 10, maybe I sell 6 guns a year on the side. That's not my main business, and not whatever. And they may be able to get away with that and not be in the business. So we have to be clear with people. It does not close all these loopholes, especially online also. But it's a much better thing. And the thing is about, as we've discussed ad nauseum on this show and every other place I've talked about this, is that when you realize that what guns are, and which is a public health problem, as smoking has been, as eating fatty foods, as drunk driving, these are not things that you ever defeat by just doing one thing. You get at them from all sides. You need education. You need cultural change. At the turn of the last century, there were spittoons at every bar because everybody chewed tobacco and was just sitting there spitting constantly. Now that doesn't exist, right? I mean, culture changed. It does.
Right. You're talking about a really interdependent kind of multivariable process. And obviously, I mean, what Obama did is right from the kind of Maoist Iranian handbook. But yeah, no.
Oh, well, he's a
yeah.
Maoist.
Yeah, we know.
Well, and
he's actually more of an Ayatollah
Yes.
Maoist. I mean, you got to be really
his
clear.
middle name is Hussein. You need to remember that.
Yeah, and
I mean,
right.
Look, I mean, just beyond the joking about it, so people know, the background check part was not the only one. There's also been other ways that he also closed another loophole where some of these people have bought guns, even machine guns, which are one of the examples that always proves the NRA and all of their acolytes wrong, because we regulated the hell out of those during the 1920s and 30s. It's actually the 1930s. The Miller Act, we did that because that was our last experiment in prohibition gone wrong, and with that regulation, very few people are able to get a hold of. You don't see people, showing up at and killing people with machine guns. It almost never happens.
Tommy guns equal freedom.
Exactly,
yeah.
but they're able to get them through trusts. Some people are, and through sort of corporate loopholes if they don't get them directly. And so this closes that. This also provides some money for mental health, which the Republicans say they're in favor of doing.
Right.
Of course, I'm assuming that's just a talking point, and they'll never support the actual funding. And also pushes funding for smart gun technology, which should just be common sense. As President Obama said when he spoke about this, we don't allow kids to go to. We realized the kids were getting their hands on Tylenol and dying, or that kind of thing. So we created bottles that kids can't open.
So these
We've
are
had
when
the
you say
technology
smart
for a long
guns
time
are
to create guns they can't shoot,
right,
and yet we haven't done it.
Right. And also make them easier to track in their purchases with serial numbers and things like that. So let's just briefly. Okay. So I mean, essentially, on a policy level, you're talking about incredibly commonsensical things that are within the president's authority because he's strengthening pre-existing laws, and he's also doing things where the government can sort of directly intervene in terms of its own actual role in the domestic arms market, which is essentially what guns are. Let's be real. But it does seem like with Obama coming out like this, it also signifies a little bit of the cultural shift, actually, that you were talking about.
Actually, that is very astute, Michael, as you always are, because I think that is as important, if not more important here, because he can't make any big moves on his own. Will this save some lives? Absolutely. The gun show, the loophole part of it, there's no doubt. I would predict it now will save numerous lives, but not nearly enough, because we're talking about thousands upon thousands, and we're at an epidemic level here. But culturally, when with Hillary Clinton and Martin O'Malley talking about this a lot, which has led Bernie Sanders to improve his position a lot. It's led a lot of other Democrats who in the past were not good on this issue to improve their positions on it, which means you've got at least people speaking out publicly. You've seen People magazine do an issue on this because you've seen sports stars wear orange like the New York
Right.
Mets did. You've seen some NBA stars cut an ad. These are all cultural changes.
Right.
When you see people in the news who are in the news, whether they're politicians, whether they're athletes, actors, musicians, when they start speaking out on these things, it makes an incredibly huge impact. And so, we see it a lot now. I see it in all sorts of places, the ones I just mentioned and others, that you never saw this issue discussed before.
Yes.
So what President Obama did in commanding so much attention and being so clear and frankly having a very human moment, I'm sure he was just faking those tears, though. Cut those onions below the, as they say on Fox, because they're such class
Well,
folks
see, in
over there.
Shia law, what you do is you can sort of fake tears it's called deceive the infidel. I can't help myself.
So,
It's just
so if you follow Sharia, it's very
Right.
cool how that just allows you to gain control of your tears in that manner.
imagine me crying about white kids. Please.
That's
It's
right.
like, so.
I mean, you
yeah,
didn't notice anything
yeah.
else he's ever cried about, did you? I mean, you didn't cry about anything. I mean, he's just thinking about black kids because that's the black president.
Right. And also black kids that, let's also be clear. I don't know. I mean, I know his Muslim affiliations, but I don't know what gang he rolls with. So maybe not
That's
all
true.
black kids.
And all those black kids clearly deserved it, right? They had it
Oh,
coming.
naturally. I mean, because they're
black?
They're black. Why am I even looking for something else to put around it?
Well,
They're
I don't
black.
understand, yeah. What's the?
So-
there's no other solution here. They're black. Come on.
Yeah. Obviously, I mean, I hate to say this, but we don't have time to be PC anymore. So before we loop this conversation, I want to actually underline those 2 points actually that you just raised about the cultural shift. And President Obama spoke to them in his Times op-ed. He said,
That's
in the corner,
huge, too, yes.
the big political takeaway is I'm not campaigning for Democrats that aren't solid on this issue. That's a big political takeaway. The cultural takeaway, and I think it was very interesting because this is definitely it's a shift. I mean, it's a shift on a number of levels. He said, I just want to quote this really quickly, Cliff, and then you can jump in. He says at the end of the op-ed, this is President Obama, quote, "Change will be hard. It won't happen overnight, but securing women's rights didn't happen overnight. The liberation of African Americans didn't happen overnight. Advancing the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender Americans has taken decades of work." He's directly lining up this issue with the sort of mass liberatory struggles of America. And that is a fundamental
Incredibly
reframe.
Smart.
Yeah.
Yes, the framing of that is incredibly smart and frankly quite true because of who is preyed upon when you see states without background checks. There's 18 states without background checks, and you see states without them. Women are more likely to be killed by a partner of theirs.
Right.
46% more likely to be killed with a gun by a partner of theirs. When you see the disproportionate effect on African American communities, Hispanic communities, whatever, that the reason why we haven't done what you would expect with guns is the same reason we didn't act quickly on AIDS, and we didn't act. It's because who's being killed are frankly the people that haven't been in control of our society.
Right.
And so it is a civil rights issue. And so to have him line up like that was hugely important. And I think culturally, also as important in that op-ed to say the kind of thing that some of us have been saying now, who find this issue to be as important as any other issue out there as an epidemic, which is, he said, I won't vote for, I won't campaign for, I won't support even members of my own party who will not stand up for common sense gun, and that affects people. That gets people to change positions, and that's hugely important too. So good for him. What he's put into this issue has been amazing. What he's done more recently. What I was going to say quickly is it capped also like a 2 to 3 week period of time that I think a lot of people who don't follow this closely may not know. But a number of hugely important things happened on the cultural front. You had the Attorney General of Virginia cancel all reciprocity, well, not all, 25 of 30 reciprocity agreements when it comes to concealed carry, which means if you get a concealed carry permit in Virginia and you get one, let's say, in Alaska, you can move to the other state and it'll be just as good in the other state. Well, Herring, who won running very openly on gun safety, looked at these other states, and 25 of the 30 of them the standards to get a concealed carry permit were so much lower than they were in Virginia that he felt that it creates a danger for Virginians, which it does. States, where you can get one when you're blind, or if you're known to be an alcoholic, or if you've committed, misdemeanor acts of violence, and you can still get
freedom,
among many other things. And so that
freedom.
was one huge.
Freedom.
Yeah, exactly. That was one huge thing. A second huge thing was in Seattle. What the NRA has done is in states where they've controlled legislatures at times, and sadly this is about now somewhere about 2/3 of the states, they pass these preemption laws, because we all know conservatives believe in localism, small government, state government, local government, until it's stuff they don't believe in, like gays getting married and and other things of that nature. And guns are another one. So they did this to stop stronger laws being passed in places like Cleveland and Seattle. They passed these preemption laws in the state legislature. Well, the courts, so what the city of Seattle did is they said, fine, what we are going to do is we're going to impose a tax on ammunition and on firearms. And they went to the court system, and the courts upheld it, saying this is nothing to do with the Second Amendment. This is their right of taxation. That could have huge implications for cities who are trying to deal with this problem around the country, and that was a big win. And so you've had a couple of these other kinds of high profile wins. Oh, and also Cook County in Chicago, because they don't have this idiotic preemption, because Illinois has been mostly controlled by Democrats, passed an assault weapons ban, and that was upheld too. So if you're watching this as closely as I do, what the president did was sort of the culmination of like 2 or 3 weeks of huge momentum on this issue, and that's incredibly important culturally and in terms of our courts and our laws. So
absolutely.
Good.
So Cliff, that is really good, and I know we're running a little tight on time, and I know we wanted to talk about the clowns in Oregon, which we have talked about a lot in the show, and I'll give you can sort of say whatever joke you had preloaded on Oregon, because it's such a disaster. But I really, before you go,
Vanilla ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Yokel Harem.
I call them Pale Qaeda. That's mine. That's my original contribution.
I'm going with a yokel harem. I like that a
yokel.
lot. But everybody has their own.
If everybody, first of all, if everybody could bring us some granola bars and some Slim Jims, we can really take this country back.
Well, did you see this thing about the guy one of them who escaped with all of the money they had raised? He ran away and ditched his fellow brothers in arms with the money.
See, I respect that guy. To me, that's American entrepreneurship.
These guys are just, they're laughable. They're not, it's really, you know what? We can make a lot of jokes. We don't need to talk about it for very long.
Yes, because I want to get to
what's going on here. I'll just say,
what
it does is it brings into focus the very radical 10 to 15%, usually around 10, that oppose background checks, who tend to be, there's a few of them that are the gun company guys who are making money and they don't care. But the vast majority of who they're exploiting, these gun guys who are making money off this, are the most radical, socially, awkward, mentally unhinged, the ones that think that, the tinfoil hat wearers, the ones that think that, that the government is implanted something in their ear. And I could go on and on, but you know who I'm talking about. And this is them. And they're not serious people. They're clowns. They're the 10% that right now that Cruz and Trump are pandering to in the Republican
and just
primary,
to be clear, Cliff,
10% is probably like 60% of the Republican primary voters.
And just to be clear, Cliff, I think we should not. I think you and I both know from sort of the information that we're privy to. We should. I wouldn't be so cavalier about talking about the computer chips in people's ears program. But that's just an addendum. Yeah, because we got to be.
Left or right here. Really, it's all what you prefer.